So our next speaker, my longtime business partner, friend, Matt Monroe, is going to get up and talk to us about cool AWS techniques.
That's right.
AWS. Doesn't sound like FileMaker.
It is not.
All right.
So, Steve and I moved to Addison, early 2000s. And we built this office and we built this server room, and it had 3 racks full of computers in it and network equipment, and it was glorious. And we actually put a window in the server room wall so that you could see the blinking lights, and you could, like, customers would come by and they would ooh and ah at how many servers we had. It was kind of the hot rod, right? It was the guy that puts the really loud muffler on there. Just check me out, right? It was cool. Our server room at the moment is not that exciting. It's got some network equipment, and it's got a big black box, which kind of does everything and backs up our servers and backs up our machines, because we've kind of moved to the cloud, right? So AWS, it takes literally 8-10 minutes to spool up a server. I don't know, depends on your mileage may vary on how long it takes you to build a FileMaker server on that. You could actually take that and save it so that when you spool up a new server, it actually just installs all that stuff for you. There's a lot of nifty things we can do with AWS. AWS, however, is not free. So we'll talk about some ways to mitigate costs, but we use a lot of AWS servers for FileMaker hosting, and our customers use a lot of AWS servers. So one of the scenarios we're going to talk through about how, kind of a tip and a trick that we've worked through is how to deal with all of my customers' AWS accounts. So we have a customer in New York. I need to log into their console to create a new machine or do things like that. That gets cumbersome, especially with two-factor authentication. We have our own AWS account. We have probably 10 customers that have AWS properties, and getting to and in and out of them is cumbersome. So that's the problem, right? That's what we're trying to solve. I also have employees that need access to that, and so do I literally have multiple IAM accounts, which is their way of saying log into the console? They call it an IAM account. Do I create IAM accounts for every single one of my employees for every single one of my customers' properties? That gets cumbersome. Hey, I forgot the password. It's not fun. And then because we have VPNs that we use from our office to those cloud instances, there are times where a VPN goes down and I've got to jockey between 2 accounts. And this is just, you pull your hair out, right? So AWS has this nifty thing called role switching, which I'll kind of walk you guys through. And we can make this process of jumping between AWS accounts a lot easier. This is our AWS account. We've got a bunch of servers. So the first thing we need to do when we set up the ability to do role switching to a customer's AWS account is we need to figure out what is our account number. Oddly enough, the easiest way to do that is to go to the support center and take a look at your account number. It's like a 12-digit number. We need to remember what that number is. The next thing we do, and we're going to pretend now that we're in our customer's account. We're not, we're in ours, but it looks the same. What we're going to do next is we are not going to create a user, because that's what we're trying to avoid. We're going to create a role. And that role is going to allow us to, and we call our role, when we do this, we call our role Gandalf, because we're geeks, and he was a powerful wizard, right? So whatever you guys want to call yours, we're going to create a role using this function here, the add AWS account, and we are going to, remember, make-believe land, we're in our customer's system. We're going to put our account ID here, and then we are going to use this same walkthrough. So let's see if it's going to let me, there we go. we are going to assign it a level of access. In our case, sometimes it's administrative access. In other cases, it's not powerful access. It can be literally the ability to see a bucket. I mean, it can be all the way down to a very small access role. We use the administrator access a lot, but we're going to give it some kind of access. I skip the tags. I understand them. I just don't understand what they would do in this context. And then we give it a name. We gave it Gandalf. You guys can call it super admin. You can call it whatever, right? So give it a role name. That sets up the role changing mechanism. So next, I will show you guys how we actually employ the role changing mechanism. Down here, so this menu, which I never know what to call it because it's your account name menu. I'm going to call it your account name menu. Yeah, your My Menu. We're going to use the switch role mechanism. And the switch role mechanism is how we set this up. So we need to put our customer's account number here, the role that we just created, and we need to give it a name. And it's a good idea to give it a name because if you don't, it makes up some complicated thing and you'll never remember what it is. And then you have 6 places. The limitation here is you can only do 6. For us, it's not quite enough, so I have my favorites. But you need to assign it one of these slots. And by doing so, it will create one of these role switching IDs. And it stores this in your browser cache. So for me to get into one of my customers' systems, I simply switch my role. Now I'm looking at their system, and they have no instances because they don't have anything in Oregon. They have it in North Virginia. You always have to remember what region we're dealing with. It's one of those facts of life. But now I can see their instances. I can take a look at their health. I can go in and monitor what their server's doing, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't have to two-factor authenticate and all that kind of stuff. And when you're working with VPNs and you're changing settings and you're whatever, again, popping back and forth is just as fast as you just saw it. When I need to go back to my own account, I go back to my account name there. I have to switch the region, but I mean that took seconds. Sometimes with two-factor authentication, waiting for the email, typing it in wrong could take minutes, and then it just gets aggravating, especially when you're just trying to look up a little piece of data.
Assuming it's not being emailed to your customer's account.
Exactly right, which they love, right? So,
They will do promptly.
yes, there are several tutorials on how to do this. That you can Google if you need to get into this kind of thing and why. But this is one of our tips and tricks, and it just kind of helps me get around a little bit faster. So I'll jump to the next one here. The next scenario is that we have servers we host in our AWS account for the purpose of putting a customer solution on so that we can develop on it and we can back it up and it's all in the cloud, but they can also access it and say, help walk through a feature or walk through a workflow, get their approval on before we actually push it to their production system. So, this is kind of one of those things where this is where AWS isn't free, right? So you've got this server and it sits there for months doing nothing, but, taking up CPU credits and taking up memory and costing you money. So, hey, wouldn't it be nice to just shut that down for the purposes of not running my bill up? And then when we do build that new feature, we power it back up, and that we we can do our development on it and use it for that specific period of time, because AWS doesn't bill you CPU credits and they don't bill you for the memory that you take up for a machine that isn't running. Now they will bill you for the space that it takes, and so that's a factor that we're not going to explore right now, but that is one of the issues. But for the most part, you can really slice your bill up if you don't run servers you're not using. So I used the Amazon SDK for PHP utility or class to basically build a switcher mechanism to kind of make life easier. I'll pop over here real quick and just show you that they have wonderful documentation, reams of documentation on how the PHP SDK works. They have a Python SDK that's ridiculously comprehensive. They've got good stuff, and it's not too terribly hard to find. There's so much of it, in fact, it's kind of like that candy store phenomenon when you walk in and you're like, I don't know what I want anymore because there's just so much. So pick a good tutorial and walk through it, and you'll get to where you want. GitHub hosts all of AWS Labs stuff, and this is where I pulled the PHP SDK down from. And you have to use Composer to basically pull it down. But having done that, it's actually fairly simple code, and I will pop over here and show you some of the code. To load up a list of all of my properties, there's a class that you call, and you run the describe instances method against that, and it pulls into the object, or now into the array, all of the details about all my running and not running instances. I don't have to log in to see that. And then to do something like start and stop, I can pass a variable into a script that says, hey, start this or stop this, and I run the start instances method against that and point it to the specific method instance ID, and it will start that instance. Or I can run a stop instance and it does the stop, right? So really simple code, not hard to figure out how to place your procedural logic into, and fairly well thought through. So we'll do two things. We're going to show you guys our time card system, because this happens to be where this is employed. And I actually haven't timed in for this meeting, so we're just going to do that right now. And then, got that out of the way. Go to Tools. This is a list of those EC2 instances that you guys saw earlier, and a description of whether they're running or not. And with that, I've captured what the toggle value would be for a stopped or started service. We can see that one of our FMS servers is running, one of them is not. So if I click this, it'll go and run that start instance method that you saw, and it's going to say pending. If we go over to the real console and hit this, you'll see that AWS FMS2 is in fact pending, and it's starting up. And it takes about 30 seconds to start. And because FileMaker is the server on there, it's going to auto start, and I have the files hosted automatically on this one. So it takes a couple of minutes, but in a couple of minutes, we've got that service up. So one of my guys comes and says, hey, I need to work on X, and that's hosted over here. I can pretty easily spin that service up, and all of a sudden they have access to those FileMaker files. And when they're done, they can use the time card tool and jump in here and say, actually we're going to refresh this page. When they're done, they can come in here and hit the running button, and that will actually initiate the stop, and it gracefully shuts down FileMaker and gracefully shuts down the instance. So save a lot of money by not powering a machine for months without actually actively using it. The question was, is it truly graceful if you just simply shut the instance down, or do you have to shut the files down? At first, I was nervous about just simply shutting the machine down, whether or not it would execute the right things and bring the files down. On this specific instance, I've decided, because it was a brand new instance we started up, and we just threw a test system on there. Actually, we were testing FileMaker 18. So server 18, so I put server 18 on there, and I just hit the stop. And it actually went through and closed the database service, and I thought did a nice job. So I have not had any instances of it corrupting any files or whatever, but we have certified developers who can log into the admin console and bring it down gracefully if we don't trust it, or if we find a reason to not trust it. I haven't found a reason to not trust it yet. It seems to do a pretty good job. We use, obviously, Windows machines in the cloud, because you can't cloud up a Mac machine to run FileMaker servers. If I'm going to run a web server, I'm going to use Linux every time. So that's effectively what we use Linux for. We run Node on our Linux boxes. We run our internal services, for instance, our web server. We run our tools that we have, like a GitLab server that we run, that kind of stuff. We run all those things on Linux. So basically, at the moment, that's kind of our duality: is web and complementary technologies run on Linux, and I don't have any choice. I got to run on Windows to run the FileMaker server. So that's my mildly politically tainted response. There's going to always be a customer that's going to say, this is how we roll, and so but for my cloud and for what we would do for things I would transition in a heartbeat. It's just being the admin for these things, which is part of what I do here, is it's just so much easier on Linux, and you just have so many fewer problems and so many things that get in the way, that get out of the Windows. I don't know. Hey, that updated overnight. The Windows, did its little updates, and now this thing doesn't work, or that kind of stuff. Just drives me up a tree. So, all right, one last deal. We're going to talk about a slightly different situation where I've got long-standing solutions that I'm hosting development copies of, and they're on all the time. And I would just love a quick, easy way to say, well, you know what, customer X, here's your bill for the chunk of my resources that you're taking up, and how do I figure out what a portion, how much to give them, and how do I figure out, it might be actually nice to have them be able to log into the Amazon console. I'm not going to give them access to my console, but if they had their own, or the ability to see only their stuff, that would be kind of nice. So these are some of the ways that you start to think and start to wonder how to divide and conquer. And they, of course, have a solution. They use this thing called an organizational account, and so I'm going to show you that quickly. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because it's not the easiest thing to set up, but you'll see the power of it here in just a second. We need to go into the My Organization section of the account, and we have these multiple organizations. You'll see one of our customers already has this set up, but if I'm going to create a new account under the organization of Harmonic, then it's pretty simple. I give it an account name, a default email, and an IAM role name to get going, right? Boom, create, and I've created a separate account. In that new account, I can now set up EC2 instances. I can set up a VPN to that. I can set up S3 buckets. I can do all kinds of things. And those are but they are under the umbrella of the Harmonic account. We all get billed the top amount. But the tools for seeing how, and I'll just pop over to the EC2 so you can see that this is indeed a separate set of instances, right? It's not that big giant pile of servers. It's just two, Linux machine for the web stuff and a Windows machine for the FileMaker stuff. And if we go into my billing dashboard, we can see for this account, sub-account, this is what the bill is so far. So it'd be very easy to share this with the customer. It'd be very easy for them to poke through and say, hey, can we get a smaller machine, or can I launch 2 more machines, or that's, that's the amount that we would, well, here to date, I mean, at the end of the month, it'll be a little bit more than that, but that would be the amount that we could charge them for basically hosting that kind of stuff. So, and, it's kind of neat because they may say, hey, I want console access, or, one of our other subcontractors wants to be able to get onto there and run a service or do an Amazon thing, and I need an IAM for that. Well, I'm not letting them into my IAM. I'm letting them into this sub account. And just to show you real quick, we'll switch back to me, and we will see my bill. And that's the whole deal right there. But if we go into bills and we hit by account, you can see it's broken up, and we can quickly get a bottom line of where things are at, and we could set this up for all the customers that we do long-term hosting for, because we do have some that, we've had development copies of their systems for years and years and years, and servers devoted to it because they're just so big, right? And so this kind of helps us organize that. So that's it. Those are my 3 tips and tricks.
Okay, one question. I saw you had a PHP solution for gathering the statuses and updating things. Of course, being a FileMaker guy, it'd be nice if there's a RESTful curl call that you can do that. Is that available as an option, or do you have to use PHP to call the statuses, start or stop a system?
I am not aware of, and I've done a decent amount of looking, for a Amazon-hosted RESTful way of simply sending and exchanging JSON to do these things. So what we've done is effectively use those code snippets that you saw and create our own RESTful listener that talks to our account, right? So, yes and no. there isn't a super easy way to do that.
Right.
But creating a REST listener in PHP, something a lot of PHP guys can do pretty quickly. And once it's set up, and once you've got the buttons that you want to run set up, it's just a kind of a drag and drop at that point. So.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Welcome.